Inside the world's harshest Supermax prisons, ADX Florence, USA, Belmarsh, UK, and Canada's SHU rules exposed. Imagine a place where time no longer behaves normally, where silence becomes louder than screams, where punishment is not physical force, but the slow erosion of the mind. In these prisons, rules are not just restrictions. They are systems of psychological control, engineered to isolate, limit, and reshape human behavior. And once you enter, there is no clear line between discipline and damage. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. For more deep research of prison documentary like this, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Supermax prisons were built for one purpose: total containment. They house inmates deemed too dangerous, too disruptive, or too uncontrollable for any other facility. But behind the concrete walls and steel doors exists something far more complex than security. These institutions operate through layered systems of deprivation, each rule carefully designed to restrict not just movement, but identity, autonomy, and social connection. This is not a story about violence. It is a story about what happens to the human mind when control becomes absolute. Special administrative measures. Special administrative measures, known inside the system as SAMs, are not standard prison rules. They are extraordinary restrictions, authorized at the federal level, intended for inmates labeled as extreme security risks. Under SAMs, communication itself becomes dangerous. Letters are read line by line. Phone calls, if permitted at all, are recorded, delayed, and sometimes limited to a few minutes per month. Legal mail is monitored under strict procedural controls. Even casual conversation with guards is reduced to necessity only. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, the stated purpose of SAMs is to prevent the spread of violence or influence beyond prison walls. But psychologists point out a second, less visible effect: the collapse of social identity. Human beings regulate their sense of self through interaction. When speech is filtered, delayed, or forbidden, the brain begins to treat silence as threat. Clinical findings referenced by the American Psychological Association indicate that extreme communication restriction often leads to heightened anxiety during rare interactions, fear of speaking incorrectly, withdrawal even when communication is allowed. Inmates under SAMs describe an unusual pattern. They begin to rehearse sentences in their heads for hours, sometimes days, before speaking. When the moment finally comes, the words feel foreign, risky, heavy. One federal inmate, held under SAMs for years, reportedly stopped writing letters altogether. Not because he had nothing to say, but because every sentence felt like a potential violation. This is how control deepens. The rule does not simply silence the inmate. It teaches the mind that expression equals danger. And once expression disappears, the next loss comes faster. Silence stops being imposed. It becomes chosen. Solitary confinement. Solitary confinement in a Supermax prison is not temporary isolation. It is the default state of existence. Inmates are confined to a single cell for 22 to 24 hours a day, often for years. There is no population to return to, no routine interaction to anticipate. The cell becomes the world. According to studies cited by Craig Haney and the National Institute of Justice, prolonged isolation disrupts the brain's ability to regulate emotion and perception. Without external social cues, the mind begins to manufacture its own. Inmates report hearing voices that do not exist. Others experience distorted time. Minutes stretching into hours, days collapsing into nothing. Thoughts loop, repeat, fracture. Psychologists describe this as stimulus deprivation, a condition where the brain, starved of input, turns inward aggressively. Memory, imagination, and fear begin to blend. One inmate held in long-term isolation described a moment when he forgot his own age. Another could no longer remember the sound of his mother's voice, even though he knew, intellectually, that he once could. Importantly, these reactions are not rare. Research published through the American Psychological Association documents that even psychologically healthy individuals can develop severe anxiety, depression, cognitive impairment, difficulty controlling impulses. The most destabilizing element is not loneliness. It is the absence of feedback. There is no one to mirror emotion back. No casual correction of behavior. No reminder that thoughts can be shared and challenged. In isolation, thoughts go untested. They grow heavier, sharper, more absolute. Over time, many inmates stop pacing, stop exercising, stop speaking out loud. Movement becomes optional. Speech becomes unnecessary. The body adapts faster than the mind. And the mind adapts in ways that are not easily reversed. Solitary confinement does not simply restrain the inmate. It redefines what reality feels like. The facilities. Supermax facilities are designed with a singular philosophy: control through environment. Every surface, angle, and barrier serves a psychological purpose. Walls are poured concrete, thick enough to absorb sound. Doors are solid steel, often automated, minimizing human presence. Windows, if they exist at all, are narrow, reinforced, and positioned to prevent any meaningful view of the outside world. According to facility design analyses referenced by the National Institute of Justice, these prisons prioritize predictability and surveillance over human orientation. The layout ensures inmates are always visible, but rarely acknowledged. Cells are arranged to limit sightlines. Hallways are long and empty. Movement is mechanical, timed, and escorted. This architecture removes uncertainty for staff, but introduces disorientation for inmates. Environmental psychologists note that humans rely on spatial variety and sensory landmarks to ground themselves. Supermax facilities intentionally eliminate both. Lighting rarely changes. Temperature is regulated uniformly. Sounds are muted, except for the occasional mechanical echo of doors opening and closing. An inmate once described the environment as being inside a machine that never stops running. There is no sense of place, only position. Researchers cited by the American Psychological Association have found that such environments contribute to chronic stress responses, heightened vigilance, emotional numbness. The facility itself becomes an authority, not a building, but a presence. Over time, inmates stop responding to the space as something they occupy. They begin responding to it as something that acts upon them. The prison no longer feels like a location. It feels like a condition. And once the environment dictates behavior, the next step becomes inevitable. The cell is no longer just where the inmate lives. It becomes how the inmate exists. Spartan cells. A Supermax cell is not furnished for living. It is equipped for endurance. The dimensions are small, deliberately so. Enough room to stand, pace a few steps, lie down. Nothing more. Inside, everything is fixed in place. A concrete bed molded from the wall. A thin mattress, often replaced only after visible deterioration. A stainless steel toilet and sink combined into a single unit. No sharp edges. No movable parts. According to correctional standards reviewed by the National Institute of Justice, this design minimizes risk and eliminates opportunities for concealment. But psychologically, it produces a different effect: the removal of agency. Environmental psychology research cited by the American Psychological Association shows that even minor control over personal space, moving a chair, adjusting lighting, arranging belongings, plays a critical role in mental stability. In a Spartan cell, that control does not exist. Personal property is limited to a few approved items. Books are rationed. Paper is counted. Even photographs, when allowed, are subject to size, content, and quantity restrictions. Inmates often develop rigid routines to compensate. Beds are made repeatedly. Objects are aligned with obsessive precision. Time is structured not by clocks, but by internal rituals. One inmate reportedly spent months tracing the same cracks in the concrete with his eyes, memorizing their shape. Another measured time by counting how long it took for the fluorescent light to hum into silence at night. Psychologists describe this behavior as cognitive anchoring, the mind clinging to predictability when autonomy is stripped away. The cell does not threaten violence. It threatens meaninglessness. Over time, The absence of choice seeps inward. Decision-making becomes exhausting. Motivation erodes. The inmate is not broken suddenly. He is simplified. Reduced to needs. Reduced to routines. Reduced to survival. And when nothing is left to do, the system introduces the next rule. Idleness. Forced idleness. In a Supermax prison, idleness is not accidental. It is enforced. Work assignments are rare or non-existent. Educational programs are limited, delayed, or entirely inaccessible. Most days contain no tasks beyond survival routines. According to research referenced by the National Institute of Justice and John Irwin, purposeful activity is one of the strongest stabilizing forces in confinement. Remove it, and time becomes unstructured, hostile. Without external demands, the mind begins to fold inward. Thoughts replay. Regrets resurface. Anger lingers. Psychologists describe this as rumination under constraint, a condition where the brain has energy but no outlet. Inmates attempt to create structure where none exists. Some count footsteps. Others memorize entire books. A few construct imaginary schedules, assigning themselves tasks that have no external meaning. But these coping mechanisms degrade over time. An inmate held in long-term isolation described how days began to blur until he could no longer distinguish one week from the next. Birthdays passed unnoticed. Seasons became theoretical. The Chicago Crime Lab has noted that prolonged inactivity in high-control environments correlates with increased depression, heightened irritability, cognitive fatigue, reduced impulse control. The danger of forced idleness is not boredom. It is identity erosion. Work and activity reinforce purpose. Without them, the mind struggles to justify effort, movement, thought, even self-restraint. Eventually, some inmates stop reading. Others stop exercising. A few stop caring whether privileges are gained or lost. This is not defiance. It is disengagement. And once disengagement sets in, the institution introduces a new motivator. Scarcity. Earning extras. In a Supermax prison, comfort is not a right. It is a reward. Items most people consider insignificant, an extra book, a radio, limited commissary access, are carefully controlled. Each privilege is tied to compliance, behavior reports, and long-term evaluations. According to correctional policy analyses cited by the National Institute of Justice, this system is designed to reinforce order through incremental incentives. But psychologically, it reshapes motivation itself. When everything is stripped away, even the smallest allowance takes on outsized importance. Psychologists note that in extreme deprivation environments, reward systems do not encourage growth. They encourage risk avoidance. Inmates become hyper-aware of rule boundaries. Speech is measured. Movement is cautious. Emotion is suppressed. One inmate described spending months modifying his behavior to qualify for a radio. When he finally received it, the noise overwhelmed him. He could only listen for a few minutes at a time before turning it off. The reward had arrived, but the mind had already adapted to silence. Research referenced by Craig Haney shows that prolonged exposure to contingent privileges can lead to heightened anxiety around mistakes, emotional flattening, reduced initiative. Inmates learn not to reach for improvement, but to avoid loss. This system also creates internal conflict. Privileges can be revoked suddenly, sometimes without explanation. The uncertainty trains the brain to expect instability. Over time, some inmates stop pursuing extras altogether. The effort feels disproportionate to the reward. Compliance remains, but engagement disappears. The institution maintains order. The inmate learns restraint. And restraint soon extends beyond behavior. It reaches movement itself. Leaving the cell. In a Supermax prison, leaving the cell is not freedom. It is a procedure. Movement is rare, scheduled, and tightly controlled. When it happens, it follows a precise sequence. Restraints applied, doors opened remotely, staff positioned out of reach. According to operational reviews referenced by the National Institute of Justice, this process is designed to eliminate unpredictability. But predictability comes at a cost. Every exit reinforces the same message. Movement is conditional, temporary, and reversible. Inmates are often escorted without eye contact or conversation. The body moves, but the person remains contained. Psychologists describe this experience as disembodied motion, the sensation of traveling through space without agency. The brain registers motion but not autonomy. One inmate recalled forgetting how far he could normally walk. After years of limited movement, his legs fatigued quickly. Balance felt unfamiliar. Research cited by the American Psychological Association indicates that restricted movement over long periods can lead to musculoskeletal decline, heightened stress response during escort, anxiety tied to transitions. Leaving the cell can also provoke fear. The outside environment, hallways, medical rooms, recreation cages, feels overstimulating after prolonged confinement. Some inmates report dreading cell exits more than confinement itself. The cell becomes predictable. The outside introduces uncertainty. Over time, the inmate learns to minimize movement, even when permitted. Stillness feels safer. The body adapts by shrinking its expectations. And once movement is controlled, the system narrows further. Not how far you can go, but how much your body is allowed to move at all. Exercise restrictions. Exercise in a Supermax prison is not recreation. It is controlled release. When permitted, it usually occurs alone, inside a small enclosed space, often concrete, sometimes partially open to the sky, always secured. There is no equipment, no interaction, no variation. According to correctional health analyses referenced by the National Institute of Justice, exercise is allowed primarily to maintain minimal physical functioning, not well-being. Psychologically, this distinction matters. Exercise normally restores balance, regulating mood, reducing stress, reinforcing bodily autonomy. In Supermax conditions, it becomes another reminder of limitation. The space is often described as a cage rather than a yard. Movement is possible, but only within strict boundaries. The body moves, but the environment resists. Researchers cited by the American Psychological Association note that restricted exercise environments can produce a paradoxical effect. Physical activity increases awareness of confinement. Stress hormones remain elevated. Relief is incomplete. One inmate described pacing in circles, not for fitness, but to reassure himself that his legs still worked. Another limited his movements intentionally, conserving energy, as if exercise were a resource that could run out. Over time, motivation declines. Muscle tone fades. Breathing capacity decreases. But the deeper impact is psychological. When the body is denied full expression, the mind recalibrates its expectations. Strength becomes unnecessary. Endurance feels irrelevant. The goal shifts from health to avoidance of deterioration. Exercise is no longer about feeling better. It is about not feeling worse. And when even physical survival is rationed, inmates begin searching for alternatives. Not resistance. Adaptation. The workarounds. When every rule is designed to restrict, survival depends on adaptation. Workarounds in Supermax prisons are not acts of rebellion. They are quiet, internal strategies, ways to preserve function without breaking rules. Psychologists studying long-term isolation, including findings referenced by Craig Haney and the American Psychological Association, note that the human mind will seek structure even when none is provided. When external control is absolute, adaptation turns inward. Some inmates construct rigid mental schedules. They assign hours to thinking, recalling memories, or silently reciting information they have memorized. This creates an illusion of progression, one thought leading to the next. Others practice controlled dissociation. They deliberately detach from emotion, flattening their responses to avoid psychological overload. This is not numbness by accident. It is learned emotional reduction. A commonly reported workaround involves mental rehearsal. Inmates replay past conversations, rebuild familiar places in detail, or imagine walking through streets they once knew. These exercises serve as cognitive resistance to spatial confinement. According to research cited by the National Institute of Justice, such strategies can temporarily reduce anxiety but often come with long-term costs. Difficulty re-engaging emotionally. Blunted effect. Persistent detachment after release. One inmate described dividing his mind into compartments. One for memory, one for the present, one left intentionally empty. He referred to the empty space as where time goes. Another stopped thinking in full sentences, relying instead on fragments and images to conserve mental energy. These adaptations are not signs of resilience in the traditional sense. They are survival responses to prolonged deprivation. The danger is that what helps inmates endure confinement often makes reintegration harder. The same mental walls that protect them inside do not disappear when doors open. The workaround becomes the habit. The habit becomes the personality. And as adaptation deepens, the system tightens one final boundary. Connection. Visitation restrictions. In a Supermax prison, visitation is not a reunion. It is a regulated encounter. Contact visits are almost always prohibited. Physical touch, handshakes, hugs, the simplest gestures of reassurance, is removed entirely. Communication occurs through thick glass, metal grates, or monitored video screens. According to correctional policies analyzed by the National Institute of Justice and State Departments of Corrections, visitation rules are designed to eliminate risk and prevent the transfer of contraband or influence. But psychologically, the effect is far more profound. Human connection is reduced to observation without presence. Psychologists referenced by the American Psychological Association note that physical proximity plays a critical role in emotional regulation. When loved ones are seen but not touched, the brain experiences a form of incomplete social reward, a stimulus that activates longing without providing relief. Inmates often report that visits leave them more distressed than comforted. One inmate described watching his aging parent struggle to hear him through the glass, knowing he could not raise his voice without being warned. Another chose to stop visits altogether, explaining that the separation felt worse afterward than before. Visitation schedules are infrequent and unpredictable. Visits can be canceled without explanation. Conversations are recorded, supervised, and sometimes abruptly ended. This uncertainty reshapes behavior. Inmates censor themselves, avoiding emotional topics to prevent visible reactions. Others withdraw completely, limiting communication to surface-level exchanges. Research cited by Craig Haney indicates that long-term visitation restriction contributes to emotional detachment, difficulty maintaining relationships, reduced motivation to reconnect after release. Over time, the inmate learns a painful lesson. Connection costs too much. The safest way to endure is not to reach outward, but to pull inward. The door closes. The screen goes dark. And the silence resumes. When control becomes permanent, Supermax prisons are often described as places designed to hold the worst offenders. But the rules inside them do more than contain risk. They reshape the human mind. Across every layer, restriction, isolation, deprivation, conditional movement, limited contact, the system teaches the same lesson. Adapt, withdraw, endure. Psychological research from the National Institute of Justice, the American Psychological Association, and scholars like Craig Haney shows that these environments do not simply suppress behavior. They retrain cognition. Inmates learn to speak less, move less, expect less. The adaptations that allow survival inside Supermax confinement often persist long after release. Emotional detachment, hypervigilance, difficulty reconnecting with others. This is not a failure of will. It is the predictable outcome of prolonged control. John Owen's work on institutionalization describes how environments like these create individuals who are no longer oriented toward society, but toward survival within systems that demand silence and restraint. The rules succeed. Order is maintained. But the cost is paid quietly, over years, inside minds that learn to disappear without ever leaving their bodies. This is not about sympathy. It is about understanding what happens when punishment becomes permanent environment. Because once a system trains people to function without connection, autonomy, or choice, The damage does not end at the prison gate. It follows them out. If you value serious, research-based documentaries that explore the psychological realities behind closed systems, subscribe to the channel. New episodes examine power, control, and human behavior where rules shape lives and silence tells the real story. Thank you for watching.